What happened when an undercover CEO ordered a lobster roll at his own seafood shack and uncovered a betrayal that nearly tore his legacy apart? Welcome, wise and wonderful listeners. Your loyalty to stories of heart, courage, and resilience is exactly what the world needs more of. Today's story isn't just about business. It's about protecting what truly matters when no one else is watching. Stay with us as we dive into a journey of quiet strength, second chances, and the power of standing up for the people who believe in you. You won't want to miss this. The early morning mist curled lazily over the harbor of Mariners Bay as Jack Mercer sat in his battered pickup truck, staring across the gravel lot at the weather-worn sign that read, Dockside Jack's Seafood Shack. For a long moment, he simply watched the modest building. Its sun-bleached shingles, the peeling red yarn trim around the windows, the familiar swing of the porch sign in the breeze. Jack tightened his grip on the steering wheel. It had been 4 months since he last walked through those doors. 4 months of hospital rooms, stern doctors, and slow, frustrating recovery after the heart attack that almost claimed him. Dockside Jack's wasn't just a restaurant, it was his lifeline, built with scraped savings and stubborn hope after the 2008 recession had wiped out his old construction business. When he lost everything else, he'd built the shack with his own 2 hands. It had saved him then, giving him a new purpose, a second chance. Now he wondered if it could save him again. The doctor's orders had been clear: rest, stay away, let others handle the day-to-day. Against every instinct, Jack had listened, leaving the shack under the care of his trusted regional manager. It was supposed to be temporary. But the longer he stayed away, the more the anxiety gnawed at him. What if the place he had poured his soul into had changed? What if it had drifted without him? His sister, his closest family, had tried to reassure him over weekly calls. "It's just a seafood shack, Jack," she said kindly. But it wasn't just a seafood shack. It was his redemption. Today, he wasn't coming back as the owner everyone recognized. Today, he was just another grizzled fisherman grabbing a bite after docking. The loose flannel shirt, the faded mariner's cap pulled low, and the scuffed boots completed his disguise. Jack rubbed his hands over the rough stubble on his jaw, checked his reflection once more, and nodded grimly. He needed to see Dockside Jack's the way others saw it now, without the weight of his name attached. The familiar salt air stung his nostrils as he stepped out of the truck, the seagulls calling overhead like old friends. The front door creaked as he pushed it open. Inside, the smell of buttered rolls, fried fish, and brine hit him like a memory. For a second, his heart swelled. Maybe everything will be fine. A young hostess he didn't recognize smiled brightly. "Table for one?" she asked. Jack nodded. He slid into a corner booth, glancing around at the weathered nets and nautical decor, the chalkboard menu listing the day's specials. He ordered without thinking the lobster roll, his signature creation, perfected over years. If anything would tell him whether the shack had stayed true to itself, it would be that first bite. As he leaned back and waited, Jack's gut tightened. One way or another, he was about to find out if the place that saved him was still worth. Jack sipped his coffee slowly, letting the familiar hum of the shack wash over him. At first glance, everything seemed normal. The low murmur of conversations, the clatter of plates from the kitchen, the occasional laugh from a customer. But as he listened closer, he caught something that didn't sit right. From a service station just a few feet away, 2 employees, a young waitress he didn't recognize, and a busboy, were refilling napkin holders, speaking in hurried, hushed tones. After a few moments, David pushed himself out of his chair. "Brett changed my shift again," the girl muttered, her voice tight with frustration. "3rd time this week. I had plans with my dad for his birthday." The boy, wiping down a counter, snorted. "Good luck complaining. Brett's the owner's cousin. He basically owns the place now." Jack froze, his cup halfway to his lips. Cousin? He didn't have a cousin. His heart thudded heavily against his ribs, a fresh wave of nausea rising. He forced his face to stay neutral, pretending to look at the menu while his ears strained for more. "I heard he's cutting hours to make the numbers look good for a buyer," the girl whispered. "Says Jack's too old-fashioned to run things right. Says he's saving the shack." The boy shook his head. "Saving it? He's wrecking it. Half the regulars don't even come anymore." Jack set his cup down carefully, his hand trembling slightly. The words sliced through him, sharper than any scalpel the surgeons had wielded. Someone was posing as family, taking over everything he'd built and, according to these kids, running it into the ground. Worse, They believed him. No mention of Jack being sick, no talk of loyalty, just resignation, as if he were a relic best forgotten. The air in the restaurant suddenly felt heavy, the cozy charm replaced with something brittle and sour. Across the room, Jack spotted movement. A man about 30, with slicked-back hair and an expensive watch that gleamed under the shack's weathered lights, laughing too loudly with a group of tourists. Brett, no doubt. Even from across the room, Jack could see it, the swagger of someone who thought he owned the place. Fury bubbled in Jack's chest, but he swallowed it down hard. He needed to be smart, not emotional. This wasn't just about bruised pride, it was about the shack's survival. And if what he overheard was even half true, it was already slipping through his fingers. Jack watched from his booth, his pulse pounding in his ears, as Brett Donovan worked the room like a practiced showman. He floated from table to table, flashing a polished smile, tossing out compliments to the female tourists, and shaking hands with visiting boat captains as if he were the proud founder of Dockside Jacks. To the casual eye, Brett seemed like a young, energetic manager, breathing new life into an old local joint. But Jack's practiced gaze saw through the act immediately. There was no pride in Brett's posture, no real affection in his interactions, just calculation. Every gesture was for show, every laugh a little too loud, every handshake lingering just a second too long to be genuine. The uglier side of Brett's leadership showed itself when no customers were watching. Jack's stomach twisted as he caught Brett berating a teenage dishwasher near the back prep station. The boy, barely 16 by the look of him, had dropped a bus tub of silverware, sending knives and forks skittering across the floor. Instead of offering help or even a quiet word of correction, Brett unleashed a humiliating tirade loud enough for half the shack to hear. "Maybe you should go back to middle school if you can't even carry a tray," Brett snapped, his voice dripping with mockery. The boy's face burned crimson as he scrambled to pick up the fallen utensils, hands shaking so badly he dropped them again. Brett laughed, a short, sharp sound, then turned on his heel and sauntered away, clearly enjoying the spectacle. Jack clenched his fists under the table, rage boiling beneath his skin. This wasn't the shack he had built. Here, under Brett's so-called leadership, respect was a punchline, and fear had replaced the easy camaraderie that once filled the restaurant's walls. Staff moved stiffly, like soldiers under the gaze of a cruel officer, avoiding Brett's path like a rip current they couldn't escape. Even Grady Fisher, the shack's grill master of over 30 years, looked hollowed out as he quietly flipped crab cakes behind the line, his usual booming laugh nowhere to be heard. The worst part was how invisible it all would be to a casual observer. To a tourist passing through, Dockside Jack's would look lively, even thriving, but Jack saw the truth in the hunched shoulders, the hurried steps, the fearful glances. His heart ached with helplessness. He wanted to storm over, tear down Brett's smug facade and set things right that instant. But not yet. He needed proof. Cold, undeniable evidence. Only then could he take back what was his and restore the shack to the family it had always been. Jack forced himself to stay seated, even as every fiber of his being screamed to confront Brett right there in front of everyone. But instinct, the same one that had helped him build the shack from nothing, told him that the battle ahead would require more than anger. It would require evidence. Cold, irrefutable proof. When the lunch rush slowed and Brett retreated to the office in the back, Jack slipped out to his truck, parked a short distance away but still within range of the shack's old Wi-Fi system. Years ago, Jack had insisted on setting up a private administrative network himself, one protected with a password only he knew, a detail Brett hadn't counted on. From the worn laptop he kept under the truck seat, Jack logged in and navigated into the shack's internal management system. His hands trembled slightly, but not from age, from fury. Within minutes he found what he feared, a forged document naming Brett Donovan as acting manager, citing temporary medical leave as the reason for transfer of authority. Even more sickening was the signature at the bottom, a perfect replica of Jack's own handwriting, copied from a contract he'd electronically signed months before with a seafood supplier. Whoever had orchestrated this hadn't just seized control, they had impersonated Jack to do it. Digging deeper, Jack traced the digital breadcrumbs back to their source. The false management change had been uploaded by an administrative account belonging to Shane Langston, the regional director Jack had once trusted. Shane, who Jack had quietly reprimanded the year before for submitting suspicious vendor invoices, had clearly decided to strike back, and he'd brought Brett along for the ride. Scrolling further, Jack's gut tightened as he uncovered even more alarming details. Inventories photographed, property valuation reports drafted, confidential vendor lists compiled, all neatly organized into a folder labeled Prospective Sale Materials. His blood ran cold. This wasn't just mismanagement or abuse of power. It was a full-scale operation to devalue, seize, and sell Dockside Jacks behind his back, and to make it look like Jack himself had authorized it. Jack leaned back in the cracked leather seat of his truck, the laptop screen still glowing ominously. The betrayal ran deeper than he'd imagined. This wasn't just about losing a business. It was about losing the last thing he had rebuilt, after life had already taken so much. And Jack Mercer wasn't about to let them strip that away without a fight. Jack sat in his truck long after the laptop screen dimmed, staring out across Mariner's Bay. The salty wind whipped through the open window, carrying the cries of gulls and the distant thud of fishing boats, docking for the day. It was easy to think of Dockside Jack's as just a restaurant, 4 walls and a kitchen, but it was so much more than that. It was the heart of the harbor. It was where fishermen brought their families to celebrate a good haul, where high school sweethearts shared first dates, where retirees swapped stories over chowder and coffee. For a town like Mariner's Bay, where generations had built their lives tied to the tides, places like the Shack weren't just businesses, they were anchors. Symbols that some things, at least, didn't change. If Brett and Shane succeeded in selling Dockside Jacks to a faceless corporate chain, it wouldn't just be Jack's legacy that died. The soul of the town would bleed with it. Jack thought of the rumors he'd heard in other towns along the coast. Beloved diners turned into sterile franchises. Seafood joints replaced with bland, cookie-cutter chains. Prices would go up. Staff would be replaced with cheaper hires. The easygoing, everybody-knows-your-name spirit would be scrubbed clean by corporate policy manuals. Mariner's Bay would lose a piece of itself, just like so many other small towns had, and the people wouldn't even realize what had been stolen until it was too late. A deep sadness welled up in Jack's chest, heavier even than the betrayal he'd uncovered. He thought about Grady, flipping crab cakes with those steady, weathered hands, about Dana, trying so hard to hold the floor staff together with spit and tape, about the regulars who still came because it felt like home. None of them knew what was brewing behind the walls of the Shack. None of them knew that within weeks the place might be sold out from under them, their memories, their traditions, reduced to just another line item on a corporate spreadsheet. This wasn't just personal anymore, it was bigger than Jack. Brett and Shane had underestimated one thing. Mariner's Bay didn't need another tourist trap. It needed Dockside Jacks, the real Dockside Jacks. And if Jack had anything to say about it, they were damn well going to get it back. His jaw set with new resolve. It wasn't just about exposing fraud anymore. It was about fighting for every memory, every handshake, every kid who dreamed of someday working the line next to Grady. Jack started the engine, heart hammering with purpose. It was time to set a plan into motion. The Shack and everything it stood for was worth saving. Jack didn't waste time once his decision was made. The next morning, while Brett swaggered around the Shack as if he owned the ocean itself, Jack slipped into the side alley behind the building, hidden by the clatter of morning deliveries. In his hand was a small box containing discreet wireless microphones. Cheap but effective tools he had picked up from a security store back when he still worried about late-night break-ins. Working quickly, he placed them in strategic spots, under the counter near the register, beneath the prep table in the kitchen, tucked into the dusty rafters of the office hallway. By noon, Jack could monitor conversations remotely through his phone, gathering the hard proof he needed. But even with recordings, Jack knew he couldn't pull this off alone. He needed someone on the inside, someone who still believed in the real Shack. That afternoon, he waited until the lunch rush ebbed and caught Dana Holmes, the floor supervisor, on her break, outside by the loading dock. She looked exhausted, her apron askew, dark circles under her eyes. At first, Dana recoiled when Jack approached, not recognizing him through his scruffy fisherman disguise. But when he pulled off the battered mariner's cap and spoke her name, in the familiar, steady voice she had known for years, recognition flickered across her face, followed almost immediately by tears. "I thought you were gone," Dana whispered hoarsely. "We didn't know what to believe." Jack gently reassured her that whatever lies Brett had spun, the truth was about to come crashing down. In hushed tones, he outlined what he had uncovered: the forged documents, the fake management transfer, the sale that would gut everything Dockside Jack's meant to the town. Dana listened, fists clenched, face growing grimmer with each word. When he asked for her help setting up a staff meeting under false pretenses, she didn't hesitate. "I'm in," she said fiercely. "We all are. They just don't know it yet." Together, they planned their next moves: gather the staff for a supposed inventory training session, use the meeting to confront Brett, and reveal everything. Jack would stay hidden until the perfect moment to strike. As Dana returned to the shack to continue her shift, Jack lingered in the alley for a moment, feeling the weight of what lay ahead. It wasn't just a business he was fighting for anymore. It was his people, his town, his second chance. And with allies by his side, Jack knew they had a real shot at winning it all back. The next morning, the staff trickled into Dockside Jack's earlier than usual, called in under the guise of an urgent inventory and operations meeting. They gathered near the front, some leaning against counters, others nursing coffees, their faces drawn tight with fatigue and uncertainty. Brett strolled in last, wearing a crisp polo shirt and an expensive watch that flashed under the shack's old lights. He clapped his hands together and smirked. "All right, folks, let's get this over with. Some of us have real work to do," he said, flashing a grin that didn't reach his eyes. Dana stood off to the side, clipboard in hand, playing her part perfectly. Jack sat tucked away in the farthest booth, disguised again, watching and waiting. His heart hammered against his ribs as Brett began rattling off new scheduling demands and inventory procedures, changes clearly designed to squeeze more money out of the staff while slashing their hours. No mention of tradition, no acknowledgement of the community Dockside Jack served, only profit, only power. When Brett paused to sip his coffee, Dana cleared her throat. "Actually, there's one more thing," she said, her voice steady but sharp. The room shifted, subtle and uneasy. Brett frowned. "This isn't on the agenda," he said. "Oh, I think it is," another voice cut in, deep, familiar, full of steel. Jack stood up from the booth, pulling off his cap, and walked slowly toward the center of the room. The room froze. A few gasps escaped from the older staff, who immediately recognized him. Brett's smirk faltered, replaced by a wary sneer. "Who the hell are you supposed to be?" he challenged, though his voice wavered slightly. Jack's gaze didn't blink. "I'm Jack Mercer," he said calmly. "The real Jack Mercer, the man who built this shack from scratch, and I don't have a cousin." A stunned silence fell. Staff looked at one another, realization dawning. Brett tried to laugh it off. "Yeah, right. I have documents, signed orders. You're just some drifter looking for a payday." Jack pulled out his phone and with a single tap, played back recordings captured from the shack. Brett mocking the staff, bragging about selling the place behind Jack's back, and calling the shack a dump full of losers. The words crackled through the speakers like a gunshot. Brett's face drained of color. Around the room, employees began stepping forward. Dana first, then Grady, then April, each one physically moving to stand beside Jack. It wasn't just Jack reclaiming the shack anymore. It was everyone choosing which side they were on. And at that moment, Jack knew they had already won. Brett's mouth opened and closed wordlessly as the recordings played on, each clip stripping away whatever false authority he thought he held. Before he could stumble through a defense, the front door swung open with a jingle, and two uniformed police officers stepped inside, flanking a woman in a sharp navy suit, a forensic auditor Jack had hired days earlier after uncovering the forged documents. The room, already thick with tension, went deathly still. "Mr. Brett Donovan?" the lead officer asked, voice clipped and formal. Brett took an instinctive step backward, his bravado draining away. "You are under arrest for fraud, identity theft, embezzlement, and attempted unlawful sale of private property." As the officer read Brett his rights, Jack watched without flinching. Brett tried once, weakly, to argue. "It was Shane! Shane Langston set it all up," he blurted, voice cracking. But it was too late. The forensic auditor stepped forward and, with clinical precision, laid out the evidence. Falsified management authorization, payroll tampering, tip skimming, and the setup of a sale to a corporate buyer, all tied back not only to Brett's actions but to Shane's digital fingerprints. Right on cue, another officer entered, announcing that Shane Langston had been picked up earlier that morning after Jack handed over the forensic report. Shane, the so-called mastermind, had folded quickly under pressure, offering a full confession that implicated Brett directly. The staff watched, wide-eyed, as Brett was cuffed and led through the front door he had strutted through so often. No one moved to stop it. No one offered sympathy. Dana crossed her arms, standing taller than Jack had ever seen her. Grady nodded once, slow and satisfied, as if flipping the last crab cake on the grill. For the first time in weeks, a sense of hope, fragile but growing, began to take root in the shack's battered walls. As Brett disappeared into the waiting patrol car outside, Jack exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Justice wasn't just a word anymore. It had a face, and it had marched straight through the front door. Jack looked around at his staff, his family, and saw what they needed most now wasn't revenge or anger. It was reassuring. It was a promise that Dockside Jacks would rise again, stronger than ever, and that their loyalty had never been misplaced. The following morning, Jack stood once again at the front of Dockside Jack's, this time without a disguise, without secrecy. Just himself. The rising sun poured golden light through the windows, catching the dust motes in the air like tiny sparks. The staff gathered slowly, a few looking hesitant, others still carrying the bruises of the past weeks in the tight set of their jaws or the uncertainty in their eyes. Jack understood. Trust, once broken, wasn't something you could snap back into place. It had to be earned. Again. He cleared his throat, the familiar creak of the old floorboards under his boots grounding him. "I owe all of you something," Jack began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "An apology. I trusted the wrong people to protect this place while I was gone, and you're the ones who paid for it." A few heads dipped, the silence heavy with memories of Brett's cruelty, the fear that had wormed its way into the heart of the shack. "But we're not going to let what happened define us," Jack continued. "This place was never just about seafood or profits. It's about us, about family, about community, about the kind of pride that comes from doing things the right way, even when it's harder." He turned to Dana, who stood quietly near the counter. "Dana Holmes, from today forward, you're officially our new general manager, with a raise to match." Her eyes widened in shock, then filled with tears. She quickly blinked away. "And Grady," Jack said, turning toward the old grill master, "if you're willing, I'm tearing up that resignation letter you were forced to hand in." Grady cracked a rare grin. "I reckon I can flip a few more crab cakes for the right boss," he rumbled, prompting a ripple of laughter around the room. Laughter that sounded like the shack breathing again. Jack didn't stop there. He announced that all unfairly docked wages would be restored immediately. Staff who had been wrongfully fired, like young Eli, would be rehired with full back pay. He distributed bonus checks as both an apology and a thank you for those who had stayed through the worst. And, most importantly, Jack reinstated the old policies: flexible scheduling for families, senior discounts at the staff's discretion, and a zero-tolerance stance on disrespect from management or customers. As the meeting broke, something shifted tangibly in the air. The stiff tension loosened. Smiles reappeared. The soft, familiar rhythm of Dockside Jack's laughter, clinking plates, shouted orders from the kitchen, began to weave itself back together. For the first time in weeks, Jack felt it, the heart of the shack beating strong again. The shack was alive again, not just open, but alive, and Jack Mercer intended to keep it that way. In the days following Brett's arrest and Shane's downfall, Jack worked side by side with his team, not as a distant owner, but shoulder to shoulder, like he had in the early days. He scrubbed the kitchen floors with Eli, learned the new coffee machine alongside April, and helped Grady prep crab cakes for the lunch rush. Every handshake from a returning regular, every smile from a grateful staff member, felt like stitching back a torn piece of fabric. Slow but sure, Jack wasn't just restoring a business, he was rebuilding a family. And with every small act, trust took root again. To mark the rebirth, Jack introduced a new menu item with a wink to those who knew the story. Shack's Honor lobster rolls, the same recipe that had built his reputation, served with an extra side of pride. Beneath the listing on the chalkboard, a small note read, "For the ones who stood tall when it mattered most." It wasn't about Brett. It wasn't even about revenge. It was about honoring resilience, the unseen battles fought in quiet moments when no one was watching. But Jack's vision stretched beyond the walls of the shack. He organized the first ever Mariners Bay Fishermen's Festival, a weekend event filled with local bands, seafood competitions, and kids' games. The kind of gathering that reminded people what made small towns like theirs worth fighting for. Dockside Jacks would sponsor it annually, he promised, pouring a portion of the proceeds back into scholarships for the children of fishing families. His shack would be more than a restaurant. It would be an anchor for generations to come. One evening, after a long but satisfying dinner rush, Jack stood on the shack's wooden deck overlooking the harbor. The sunset blazed across the water, painting the sky in fiery gold and soft pinks. He sipped a cup of black coffee, brewed strong just the way Grady insisted, and listened to the sounds behind him. Laughter from the staff, clinking dishes, the low thrum of a guitar someone strummed near the fire pit. Jack closed his eyes and smiled. The shack had been bruised, tested, nearly broken, but it had endured, and now it was stronger than ever, not because of any one person, but because of the people who had refused to let it die. His legacy wasn't just a building or a brand, it was a spirit, a bond, something deeper, anchored as firmly as the boats bobbing gently at the pier below, and Jack Mercer knew in his bones that spirit would never be taken from them again. Jack Mercer's story reminds us that real leadership isn't just about building something, it's about protecting it, nurturing it, and standing up for the people who believe in it when times get hard. Dockside Jack's wasn't saved by flashy plans or corporate strategies, it was saved by loyalty, integrity, and the courage to fight for what matters. In a world where it's easy to lose sight of roots and community, Jack's journey proves that legacy is built not just on success, but on resilience and heart. When betrayal threatened everything he had poured his soul into, Jack didn't respond with rage or revenge. He responded with action, with truth, and with faith in the people who had been there all along. In doing so, he not only reclaimed his restaurant, he restored hope and pride to an entire town. The real treasure isn't in profits or expansion. It's in the memories we create, the people we lift up, and the spirit we refuse to let die. True success isn't measured by what you build, it's measured by how fiercely you fight to protect it when it's threatened.